Hey guys, Curtis here, and in the last couple of days, I've been seeing some articles pop up talking about the Big Bang, and I think there was two different articles, and now there's a third one, and they basically say that the James Webb Telescope, the new telescope put into space, taking new images, is showing data that contradicts the Big Bang Theory. And the Big Bang Theory, of course, is that all the matter in the universe and all the space in the universe was originally condensed into one point at the beginning of the universe, and it exploded into our current universe. And the amount of matter was constant throughout that expansion period. So right now, there's an enormous amount of matter in the universe. So that was all condensed into one point. That was very hot because when you condense energy, it becomes hotter or something like that. And I thought it was interesting that these articles about the Big Bang are coming out. Apparently, there's some scientist who wrote a book like 30 years ago, The Big Bang Never Happened, talking about contradictions in the evidence. I didn't read it, but he's the same guy that wrote one of these articles. I can't access this article on my computer, but for some reason on my phone, I read it, and it basically said new evidence says it's unlikely the Big Bang happened because it contradicts some of the observations that scientists have made. And anyways, this all kind of started coming up, and it reminded me of an experience that I had that I've thought about a lot that I'm going to tell you about now. And if you follow my channel, if you know who I am, you know I'm a very spiritual person, and I follow sort of the David R. Hawkins model of consciousness as relating to my spirituality, and he has explained some crazy stuff. But basically, I'm a very spiritual person, and I believe in a lot of spiritual concepts that go far beyond science. And interestingly, I have some commentary on the Big Bang, which relates to a spiritual experience that I had. And if you've ever heard of the chakra system, it's basically the components of the human mind make up the chakras, which some people will call like the spirit body or the soul or something like that. A couple of years ago, that's relevant because a couple of years ago, I was doing a spiritual technique where I was just letting go of fear constantly, and according to the book Letting Go by David R. Hawkins, but I was letting go of fear constantly, and I did it for about 3 weeks straight. And all of a sudden, one day, I had like an explosion of spiritual energy. It's like all the spiritual energy in my body was rushing up through my crown chakra, and I was just having these spiritual revelations. And I looked up about the chakras, and it turns out the crown chakra is related to your understanding of God. And interestingly, all the revelations I was having at that time were revelations about how the universe began and how it works. And so I would like to explain what was revealed to me. None of this is my theory. It's something that I basically saw in my head. It was an experience that was happening to me, and at that time, I also, for about 3 days, this revelation was happening, and I after about the first day, I realized it was an explosion of spiritual energy going through my crown chakra, I believe. And interestingly, the energy was so intense, I was able to actually point it at the world by willing something to happen, and the thing I willed to happen actually happened. Actually, two different things happened. And I've actually talked about that in prior videos, but that's not the point of this video. But basically, spiritual energy is very real, and I had an explosion of it by doing 3 weeks straight of a dedicated spiritual practice. And during the 3 days in which I had my revelation, or about 3 days, I don't remember exactly, 2 or 3 days, I saw, it was revealed to me how the universe began and how it is still being created now by God. And my revelation actually revealed to me how gravity works and what gravity is. And I'm going to be explaining that to you now. Just because it's been in my head a lot, I've thought, I really need to explain this to people. I think I did mention it and explain it in a prior video, but it wasn't the point of the video. But this video is totally dedicated to explaining how the universe began. And so, and this article that I read, it didn't really have a good explanation. It basically said scientists are desperate to come up with some kind of theory for how the universe began that agrees with all the observable data, and they keep finding new observations that contradict their previous theories, and it's really pissing them off because, scientists want things to make sense, and when you can't explain something, it doesn't make sense. And even the Big Bang Theory, if all the observable data agreed with it, which it does not, but even if it did, the scientists still wouldn't have an explanation for where all the mass of the matter, all the mass of the universe came from before it was a singularity at the beginning of the universe. So there really is no explanation, but I'm going to give you the explanation now, which was revealed to me, and I do not believe this is a complete explanation. There's probably tons of little parts of it that need to be examined further by, frankly, not really scientists, but spiritually adept people who are informed by science. I don't really know anything about cosmology or anything like that. I'm just going to explain to you what was revealed to me. So, what was revealed to me is that the universe was not, it did begin in a single point, and it is expanding, but it did not begin as all the matter and space in the universe was condensed into a single point. What actually happened was that the beginning of the universe was one speck of space that emerged into existence. Basically, it was created. You could say it was created by God, or you could explain it as the energy of space. And space is actually, it was revealed to me, space is made of energy. And this energy is also the same exact energy that makes up matter. Matter is just that same energy operating sort of at a different frequency or charge, you might say. And this is actually backed up by science, because science has seen that if you zoom in on an atom, if you keep zooming in, you just find empty space that has some kind of energetic charge. It's not actually a physical thing that you can't move through. It's just empty space that is charged with energy, or at least that's my current understanding of it. But what it was revealed to me is the universe began as a speck of space that came into existence. You could say in a spiritual sense by the power of God, or you can explain it more scientifically by saying that there is an infinite amount of energy that exists that simply exists on a different frequency than anything that is observable by us. And this energy that exists, that is unobservable, that cannot be measured in any way, it is, from a spiritual perspective, it makes up what you might call God, or it is produced by what you might call God, which is the infinite energy of all that exists. But this little speck of space appeared, and it was basically a change in the frequency of the energy of God, or just the infinite potential energy that exists. And the speck of space was just one minute, the smallest possible measurable amount of space. But here's the thing, once that was created, a second speck of space appeared, and then a third, and then a fourth, and they appeared next to each other. And specks of space, I don't know whether it's called like the Planck scale or something, but very tiny amounts of space are actually appearing basically everywhere where space already exists. And so physicists or cosmologists, they think that the universe is expanding because currently existing space is stretching. That's not actually an accurate observation or accurate description of what is happening to the universe. It's actually, space is not stretching, it's that new space is emerging, which is being pushed into existence, you might say, but it's actually the energy of the new space that is coming into existence actually already existed, just at a different frequency that did not interact with the frequency of the energy that makes up space. And so, scientists say you cannot create new energy, it just changes forms. Well, my theory actually preserves that law. What I'm saying is new space is being created in our universe, but it's not actually coming from nothing. It's just a change in frequency of the energy that already exists beyond what we can measure in any way. And so my idea preserves the conservation of energy. So so that is it. And I drew a little diagram here. So so imagine this black bar is a measurement of frequencies, and you have, let's say, a very high frequency up here, which goes up to infinity, and down here you have a very low frequency, which is ultimately the frequency of matter. Well, as excuse me, I'm coughing because I'm recovering from illness, but as the energy of God, which is up here, as it changes in frequency, it creates new paradigms, or you might even call them dimensions, in which life emerges, and life is only able to detect the range of energy in a piece of the frequency of all the energy of God. In other words, we are all a piece of God. We're all made of the power and energy of God, but we cannot detect all that is God because we're not omnipotent, but we're made of God, so we can detect a piece of it. And so there's all these different frequencies of the energy of God, which span, like there might be living things that detect this frequency of God, and living things that detect this frequency of God, and this one. And then here we have space. This is where the energy of God transforms into what is measured as space and is scientifically detectable by us. And so this is our observable universe. The energy of God moves this way in frequency. It becomes little dots of space that appear everywhere in space, or actually not everywhere. I'll tell you how they appear. But they appear here, and then the energy that is space eventually continues changing frequency until it reaches a point where it has enough. It has a certain frequency which it operates at it interacts with other energy in a different way, and we call that matter. And this is the frequency at which energy behaves as matter. And so the interesting thing is that if you zoom in on an atom constantly to as close as you can get, you find out there is no solid mass there. It's actually just space that has been sort of energized in a certain way. And as it turns out, there's no difference in that energy. It's a continuous connection to the energy of space. So let's say this is the universe, and you have all this space here that is energy at a certain frequency, and then you have a little atom here, and the space and the atom are not separated. They are the same field of energy, and beyond space you have the energy, the infinite energy of God, which goes out in all directions. So this is pretty much the worst diagram of all time, but I'm trying. I'm not a good designer, so I can't make this. But so basically, the energy of God emerges in our universe. It's not being created from nothing. If you observe the creation of new space, it looks like it's being created from nothing. We can observe that our universe is expanding, and I don't know how physicists would ever tell the difference between the spaces stretching out versus new spaces coming into existence. But I'm actually going to tell you why new spaces coming into existence makes more sense, and that's because new space emerging into existence is actually the source of gravity. And so this is going to be hard for me to draw, but bear with me. So in the beginning, you had a little tiny speck of space, and then after some time happened, it grew in more specks of space appeared next to it over time, and this is what is stretching out the universe. And so if you think about what if God emerged a new speck of space in the middle of these specks of space, but it was just as big as the other specks of space, what it would do is push these specks of space away from each other, away from the new space that is emerging, and that would make the universe over time bigger. and so you have this chunk of space, this chunk of space, this chunk of space, this chunk of space, you know. And so if I take a piece of space this big and I stick it, let's say, in between here, it's going to push this space away from it. Because that's just how space interacts, I guess. And so the expansion of the universe is not caused by the original space stretching out, and becoming elongated. It's actually happening because the infinite energy, which you could call the power of God or just potential energy of existence, the frequency of the energy of God or potential energy is changing, and it is now affecting the energy of space. It's operating this frequency, and from our perspective, from our observation, it appears as if new space is being shoved into the universe and pushing away all other space, and that is what causes the expansion of the universe. Now, here's the really interesting thing. Let me delete this and explain it. So let's say, okay, and so where does matter come from? Well, it turns out matter is the same exact energy of space, just operating at a different frequency or a different charge, whatever you want to call it. So all that space that is pushing away from each other, eventually some of that space gets pushed into each other, I guess, and it energizes as matter. But let me show you where gravity comes from. So let's say there's space. In each one of these circles is supposed to represent a measurable amount of space. So let's say you have all this space here, and here it is, and it's constantly new space is constantly emerging. Each one of these dots emerge in the middle of all the other space, and it's pushing against it. So if you drew a diagram of all the pushing forces, all these space measurable pieces of space are pushing against each other constantly, and that push eventually it pushes the energy into each other, and it condenses, I guess you could say. Once it condenses enough, all these things pushing into each other, it condenses into the energy of matter. And I think that's my best explanation for it. It might just be that the frequency of the space is changing, but I think it has to do with the push. So as all these forces of space are pushing into each other, they eventually condense into really dense energy, or I don't know if dense is the right word, but really dense space energy, which then changes frequency of energy or frequency of something, and it operates in a different way. It interacts with other energy in a different way, just like a hot piece of matter interacts with its environment in a different way than a cold piece of matter. Hot stimulates things with its electrons, whereas cold kind of sucks the electrons out of other things. So all of this space is constantly pushing down. Actually, it's pushing in all directions when new space emerges, which is a constant phenomenon. And it turns out that, let me draw this a little bit better. So it turns out, let's say this is planet Earth, right here, Earth. And out here in the universe, you have space. And these dots, they fill up this whole thing except for where planets are. And so now what happens when I take a piece of space and I emerge it in the middle of other space, and it pushes away all other space? What's going to happen is that push comes down to Earth, and that is gravity. And this phenomenon is happening at all places in space at the same time. They are all pushing in all directions at the same time, which is the phenomenon that causes gravity. And I don't know exactly how the space interacts with matter, but because of this push of new space emerging, so it's pushing against all matter that exists and all other space that exists. It's also expanding the universe, because as the space becomes more dense, yes, it pushes other space until it condenses into matter and makes planets eventually over billions of years. but it's also pushing itself out, and that is the expansion of the universe. So, it's important to realize that this theory, what it means is that if scientists go looking for the emergence of new space and well, they already see the emergence of new space by observing that the universe is expanding. They just didn't know that the space is being created. It instead of stretched out. But what this means is that this is basically my theory of gravity. I didn't come up with it. It was basically, it felt like I was watching a movie when this was happening in my head. And it happened as a result of energy going through my crown chakra. Maybe someone who knows how to channel chakra energy could channel energy into their crown chakra and kind of like learn about this. But basically, it's important to realize that from the physical perspective of humanity, this theory means that it looks like to us that space and matter are being created from nothing. However, they are not being created from nothing. They are actually just the energy of God changing into a frequency which operates in our little piece of the energy spectrum. So this black line is the spectrum of energy of all that exists. And so when energy of God or energy that exists, you don't even have to call it God, when it changes in frequency and operates in our spectrum, it appears to us that new space and energy and matter is being created out of nothing. However, it's not coming from nothing, it's coming from God, or you might call it the energy of all existence. So it is. I believe this is a complete theory. I mean, I really believe this is real because the revelation sort of happened to me. Another thing that I learned from muscle testing, which is something I got from David R. Hawkins, by testing. So I saw some things in my head, but it wasn't like a voice narrating it. It was like almost like I was watching a movie of the universe being created. And what I saw, some things I wasn't exactly understanding of, and so I muscle tested some ideas. And the reason, so one thing to note about this theory is that it appears that space is appearing more frequently where space is less dense, or where I could say energy is less dense. So the reason why the inside of the Earth is not pushing out away from space enough to explode the Earth is because the space that is emerging everywhere constantly, it is emerging at a higher probability in the locations where space is least dense. And so out here in the vastness of space away from planets, that's where you're getting lots of new space appear all the time. And then as that space pushes against each other, it eventually condenses into matter. And I don't know why it's emerging out away from matter more, but that's just what my muscle test seems to confirm. It seems to go with what I saw. So this is my theory of gravity. This means that gravity is caused by space pushing against other space. That also causes the expansion of the universe. And this push effect happens because new space is emerging seemingly out of nothing. But the complete explanation of how that happens is that the energy that is emerging out of nothing actually did not come from nothing. It came from an undetectable frequency of energy, which is beyond our universe, beyond what we can detect. And this makes perfect sense. You know, before radios existed, radio frequencies were a thing, but nobody could detect them. But the energy was still there, and it could have had minute physical effects on the universe, the planet. Just like that, this energy that's way up here in the frequency, it could be having all sorts of effects on our universe, and it is. But we would never know that something beyond what we can detect exists unless somehow we have tools which can, new tools developed which can detect it. And so that's pretty much all I saw in my revelation. I might have seen a few more things, but I don't really remember because this was a couple years ago. But I've been thinking about this a lot. And I think Oh, by the way, this also explains why this whole law of attraction manifestation stuff can kind of happen. It's because your consciousness is just part of the energy of existence. And just like I said, if you zoom in on matter, you'll see that it's empty space, which means that it's made of the same thing that space is made of, which really means that matter and space are connected. They're not separate things. But if matter and space are connected, that means that the entire universe is actually just one big thing of energy. And apparently, that's what a lot of spiritual teachers say. And I think quantum physics is kind of saying that, like, everything is just frequencies of energy. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist. But this explains why law of attraction can work. Actually, this doesn't explain it. This explains gravity in the universe. But the idea of all the universe being one pool of energy that's all connected, that explains why holding an idea in your mind could possibly affect the physical outcomes in the universe. And I've had a lot of that happen in my life, and a lot of people have written about it. And that's something that right now is just purely in the realm of spirituality. Scientists don't really believe in that stuff, but I'm sure you could probably test it. There was actually a guy who wrote a book called The Science of Creating Miracles, in which he said that he and his father, who was a physicist, I believe, they ran a test in which they tested manifestation, and they proved it to a high degree of confidence, like 99.999% or something. But he didn't really go into the exact details of the scientific setup of the test, and his book was very long, and so I didn't even finish it. But apparently, if you think about it, you could test manifestation and stuff like that by testing extremely improbable events and seeing if you can make them happen by using your mind or something like that. But anyways, that's beyond what I wanted to get into. I just thought it was connected, because if everything is energy that's connected and it's all part of we're all part of the energy of God, then maybe we can affect other energy in the universe because it's really just part of ourself. It just looks like it's away from us. But anyways, this is my theory of gravity and the expansion of the universe and the creation of the universe. Remember, all this stuff, it didn't exist billions of years ago, because we've had something like 13 billion years of new space and new energy and new matter appearing in the universe, which has grown the universe to what it is. But at the very beginning of our universe, there was one speck of space, and that was the beginning of our universe. And then more space emerged. But before that, I guess you could just say that the energy that makes up God did not resonate at this frequency that is what our universe is. And this also kind of makes sense with something that David R. Hawkins said, which is that according to his muscle testing and his spiritual, experience, there are infinite universes and infinite dimensions. Well, if the energy of God, if this frequency goes on infinitely, and it might even go in this direction too, I don't know. But if it goes on infinitely, then that means that there could be living organisms, infinite numbers of living organisms who all just detect a portion of a certain frequency range within the power of God. And so we're all made of God's power, but we are not the sum total of God's power. He's infinite. So that's sort of my theory of the universe. I didn't come up with it. It was revealed to me because of a spiritual experience that I had. If you want to have spiritual experiences like that, I wasn't trying to make it happen. I had no idea that could happen. But it just happened because I was using the letting go technique, which is described in his book called Letting Go. It's a yellow book, yellow and white. But yeah, when you perform spiritual actions consistently, you tend to end up having spiritual experiences. And in the future, I'll probably make videos about that. In fact, I already have an idea for a video, but I'll have to wait and see. I only make these videos really when inspiration comes to me and I feel like I'm supposed to make it. So I hope you enjoyed my theory of emergence. I guess it's the theory of space emergence and energy emergence. But it's really, emergence sounds like it's coming from nothing, but really it's just coming from a different frequency, which you could call the energy of God. So that's all I've got, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.